Pretty much all of our knives that we're making right now are finished one at a time, and we spend kind of a lot of time on just all the little tiny details. We're trying to make knives that aren't just one-offs, maybe don't have all of the fancy touches, but function just as well. This is something that I've been wanting to do for a long time. For me, the challenges in doing this are making them cut well, making them feel nice, making them still look good, and then streamlining the process to keep costs down and just be able to make them more efficiently. I'm always going to keep doing the one-off projects just because that's kind of like the bread and butter. I've been doing that for a long time, and I just want to keep making better and better knives and just become the best maker that I can be. There are two different approaches that I can do. I can take my usual design and kind of go backwards and simplify things, make things quicker, or I can start from scratch. And I'm starting from scratch. I just don't like the idea of taking the design that I've been doing for years and dumbing things down just to make them faster. It seems kind of half-assed and lackluster. I would rather design something with purposeful intent from the very beginning. So I'm going to start off drawing something I like and then making a prototype of it. The goal of it is just to see how it looks and feels in the end. I've definitely drawn up or thought up knives in my head, and they looked right until I made them. And then there's something missing there, physically or like visually. Ultimately, the goal is to make the best all-purpose chef's knife with as few elements as possible. So no crazy materials, no crazy shapes, just simple and clean. So let's talk design on a chef's knife. There's a few loose guidelines to start with that make a chef's knife feel really good and stay comfortable for a long time. Number one is size, number two is profile. After that, there's like a million specific details that you can go in to dial into whatever you like steel, thickness, geometry, handle shape, construction style, hardware, materials. Yeah, there's a bunch. Starting with just the basics, you can't go wrong with a 8-inch chef's knife. Going bigger is fine, but the bigger you go, the longer it takes and the more expensive it gets. And some people don't have the board space for like a really big knife. For me, 7 inches is too small. It's kind of in this weird in-between of like a small chef's knife but like an oversized petty. That's just my preference. I don't really like the balance of them. If I was going that length, I would just go with a petty. So we'll start with an 8-inch chef's knife and go from there. For the profile, most good chef's knives have some sort of taper going from the heel to the tip. And don't ask me like how much, because it varies, and I don't really know until I kind of draw it out and figure out what I like. Like that. So I'll just draw two converging lines, just a mild taper. It goes from, where is this? It goes from 2 inches to about 1 1/8. So just pretty subtle. I like 2 inches at the heel. That's a good place for the height to be. You don't want any more narrow than that, because then it starts becoming like a sujihiki, like a slicer, which is nice, but for an all-purpose knife, you want about 2 inches in width. Kind of depends. This is one of my old knives, and it's definitely less than 2 inches. So it's good, but you sacrifice knuckle clearance. Most of the time, I don't feel like I really know what I'm doing. I just kind of shift lines around until it feels about right. And so the nice thing about this subtle taper is it's gonna give me a little bit more width at the tip, which helps push a little bit more weight towards the front, keeps a little bit more strength in it, depending on your geometry and stuff like that. My ideal balance on a chef's knife is pretty much where I'm pinching the blade. I don't like knives that are handle heavy. I really don't. That's my preference. I like the knives to be exactly where I pinch the blade. And on a shorter blade, I mean, 8 inches is not too long. To me, that's a fairly short blade. I need all the help that I can get. And plus, with a wider tip, I keep a little bit more strength and rigidity towards that point. And seeing as this is supposed to be kind of like an all-purpose like chef's knife, I want a slightly more robust tip than something that's like super finesse and a little bit delicate. Now that I've got these two lines in place, I'm gonna figure out where I want the tip to be. I kind of start somewhere dead center of those two lines. The higher I go, the more Western it is in profile. You're gonna have a bigger belly. It's gonna be good for rock chopping. The lower you go, you're gonna have a flatter profile, and it's gonna be good for push and pull cuts. And I like the push and pull technique when cutting food and stuff like that. But not everybody likes that. So I'm just gonna keep the tip somewhere in the middle for now. And then if we need to adjust it, we can. But the center between those two lines is a good starting point to kind of figure out where you wanna go from there. When I'm sketching out a lot of my designs, I use old knives and templates and stuff like that to help me do the curves. You can use a French curve if you want. I don't have one here, and sometimes the French curve is a little too drastic. I want some really subtle curves in there. So I'll seal the tip area of this knife, just that front area, and then kind of blend it towards the heel. And on my knives, I definitely like a flat section towards the heel because I don't like so much belly throughout the whole profile. I want it to be able to rock chop and do push and pull cuts. So I'll have about, let's say, half of the profile to be flat-ish. So I'll take that belly and I'll kind of blend it with the lines that I have. So I've got my tip, I've got my heel, length, width, taper, all that kind of stuff. Now we can start drawing in about the handle. I've talked about it in other videos, but for the handle placement, I kind of start with the tip, I put the ruler there, and then I start about where the handle is gonna actually start around here. And I just draw a line parallel to the whole profile. And that's a good starting point for me. And obviously with the knives and the profiles, you're gonna be adjusting this a lot, but you can't really go wrong with the handle in line of the whole profile of the blade itself. You don't want the angle of the handle to be too far down or up, because that's going to mess with the ergonomics and it's going to mess with the visual flow of the handle of the whole knife itself. I'll take this whole line, kind of draw it across. For handle length, I'm usually around 5 inches on a decent sized chef's knife. This one goes slightly under, so somewhere around 4 3/4. So now I've got my basic foundation. This is a pretty good starting point to kind of like flesh out the rest of the lines and figure out how I want the handle to look, how I want the interface from the handle to the blade, how I want the tip to look, and just overall flow and just whatever else details. For the tip, I usually just draw some sort of line and then kind of blend in that transition right there. My temptation is to start adding in a bunch of like random shit like facets and flares and all sorts of stuff. That's my comfort zone, to make knives as complicated as possible. It's easy to make a knife look good when you start adding a lot of embellishment, but then it starts getting way more complicated to make when you're actually making the physical knife. If you can make a knife look, feel, and cut good with just the basics, then you're pretty much set up to do whatever you want after that. Another thing I'm trying to do is keep the weight down where the handle is. On my other knives, I go pretty extreme to drill a bunch of holes in the tang, taper it, and then hollow grind the tang itself. On these, I'm trying to design it with simplicity and mass in mind in the design itself. And looking at just the profile, it makes sense to have the handle be skinnier towards the rear. I'm usually used to the opposite because of looks. The last thing to avoid for me is to do any sort of complex inside curves. They can look good, but they can really easily add a lot of complexity and time to just everything. So here's what I've got. It's pretty basic, nothing too crazy, nothing insane, but that's kind of exactly what I'm going for. In my eyes, this looks pretty good to me. All of my stuff, I'm kind of looking at it like again and again throughout a period of time, because today it looks good to me, tomorrow it's gonna look like shit. That's just kind of how I've been designing a lot of my stuff, is draw up an idea, see how it looks tomorrow, see how it looks next week, and then just make revisions and go from there. It's just iterations on iterations, and then eventually you find out what your tastes are, what you like, what you dislike, what's actually easy to translate to a physical form and what doesn't work, things like that. Obviously, this is a pretty huge departure from what I usually do, especially with the more basic handle and the removable hardware. So it's not going to be for everybody, but that's kind of the point. None of my knives are for everybody. But even then, it still terrifies me a little bit, just because it's a lot of new, a lot of unknown. I've been doodling kind of like a basic chef's knife for like years, just different ideas here and there. And I'm always battling in my head, how simple can I take it without it being too simple? Like I said, my comfort zone is just making crazy shit. And so this is scary to me, doing something with very little. And we'll just see how it works out. So next is making the prototype and then seeing if it actually feels and cuts well. And then 3 years later, we have the prototype. Hi, yes, I'm filming. Hello. I know, there's thunderstorms. What a surprise. Okay, you're gonna sit on my foot. You're a good boy. 3 years later, here's the prototype, the first one. I made it pretty close to that drawing. I've been using it and looking at it ever since then. And this is just the proof of concept. So you can see the lines and stuff like that. Carbon steel, black paper micarta. It's okay. In the drawing it looked better. In person, when I look at it, kind of in different views and stuff like that, it's lacking something. It's more bland than I thought. And so after about a year of using this and looking at it and brainstorming more ideas, there's the second prototype. I've also been using this for years now. This is a big step forward. If you compare the two, they're similar, but this is just more sleek. It's less tactical. This has more of that like handle drop and like more aggressive like proportions. This is more tapered, gentle, in line and nimble looking, and just a little bit more elegant. And this was really close to what I wanted. This is actually the basis of kind of the final prototype that I ended up with, which was this one. So this is the final product. This is the generation 2. These would be like generation 1 and 1.5 or something like that. This is generation 2 of the current final design series, whatever that means. To me, this looks more complete. It's like the same idea. Like if you look at the two of them, they're similar, but it's just the devil's in the details. And this all just kind of flows better. The lines work better together. It still has that handle drop, like here going back, and the handle tapers out, but somehow it just all jives better. I don't know how to explain it. My eyes can tell when I'm looking at it, but I don't know. So this is the result of, I guess, 3 years of brainstorming, planning, R&D. Oh my God, the R&D, I can't even, that's later. R&D's later. These are now stainless. I've been wanting to do the stainless for a long time. It just took a little bit more work to get to that point. And I'm really proud of how like the finish turned out. Like the kind of like satiny, silky stonewash looks really nice. It's wider too. The geometry of this is wider. Like I was talking about how 2 inches is kind of where you should start, and it's good. You get a lot of knuckle clearance. Like I don't need any more. But having just even, I don't know, 1/3 of an inch more for people with big hands, or even this, like it just, you get so much more substance with that. It feels so much nicer. You don't ever worry about knuckle clearance, and it adds a little bit more weight. I like the blades to be a little bit more front heavy. So this is where I'm at with those. I'll talk about kind kind of the process of how we go through and make these and what we've discovered and kind of the problems and pitfalls and solutions that we came up with. That'll be next video. But after 3 years, this is what I'm happy with. It's interesting too, because when I'm working on my signature series, like this stuff, like this is that Old Faithful, it took me about 3 years to get more comfortable with the design. And the same thing with the hidden tank stuff, like those Western handles, took me about 3 years to kind of refine and figure out what I like as far as the lines and the personality of the blade and that kind of stuff. So I guess it makes sense. And yeah, these are made to order now. We've got kind of a process that's a little bit more streamlined for me and Sam. That was kind of like the big impetus of all of this. And also being able to make a knife that's just more accessible. And I think that's it. You saw the beginning, you saw the current, and I guess in another 3 years, you'll see the next. Thanks.